Welcome everyone to Ruff and Rugged. I'm very pleased to be able to present this all to you. I'm going to walk you through on a higher and lower level to show you exactly what this production kit has in it and how it might be able to help you be creative. Let's go over to the screen and I'll show you on a high level first what some of the features of the kit are. So we'll tab over to the 6 main groups: drums and percussion, bass, synths, pianos, guitars, and effects. This has been a project that has been ongoing for about a year and involved the help of 2 good friends of mine, Max and Arla Filizek. They have an amazing studio called Summerland Studio, and on top of this, they are also very good musicians. We met about 2 years ago, and Max had come to me looking for some help building a studio, what microphones to use, what studio gear, what outboard gear, that kind of thing to choose for it. Over the months that we got to know each other better, Stranger had approached me asking if I wanted to make a production kit or a sample pack. I, of course, agreed. I knew that I would want to make something beyond the scope of just a few synth patches and a few breaks that were processed in a certain way. I really wanted to make something that was a fully fleshed out, complete production environment. And I knew I had some of the skills to make it happen, but I didn't have the sounds to make it happen. As I thought about it more, I thought, okay, well, if I wanted to make something that I would be excited to use, I knew it would have to have original breaks, original instruments, lots of synth patches, lots of processing options, and be fairly easy to use. I went back to Max specifically and asked him, hey, I know you're a musician and now you've got all this gear, would you be interested in helping me work on a sample pack? Now at the time I thought, well, maybe I'll just get his help recording some guitar loops and maybe a few drum loops, but it quickly turned into a very large project, much beyond the scope of what I had intended initially, and I'm very glad about it, and I'm also very glad that he had the patience to stick through the very long and tiresome recording sessions. We ended up increasing the scope of the project to be electric guitar loops, acoustic guitar loops, sampling an entire piano, recording original loops for that piano, recording bass, recording all sorts of different percussion and drum loops, as well as drum separates, so i.e. snares individually, kicks individually, toms individually, and so on. And so what the end result is a fusion of their talent, Max and Arlo, and my time and arguably talent, making the other supporting elements like synthetic basses, synthetic drums, synthetic pads, things like that to fill in the gaps of what would otherwise just be a purely instrumental production kit. And the result is Ruff and Rugged. On the top of the drums and percussion plus bass groups, you'll notice this Max for Live device called DEV81. I initially didn't have any intention of making any custom plugins for any reason, but I soon discovered that it would be important to have some sort of Neve-style processor for things like low frequencies and things like percussion, because it always makes them sound so full and lush. I had a choice to make, which was, do I try to use stock effects within Ableton Live, cobble them together in a group, and then give them a few controls to make it sound something like a saturation and equalizer unit? Or option B, do I just go all out and learn how to use Max for Live and make a custom processor that basically does exactly what I want it to do? And it's pretty clear what option I chose. And this is sort of a theme in the project itself. This processor ended up taking about 2 months to design. I really liked the color of this Vintech X81. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to have this emulated in software? I ran various test tones and sine sweeps through this unit, changing various settings like the frequencies and gain, input gain, Q settings, high pass, output gain, and just the overall frequency response of the unit itself with no effects enabled by turning the EQ off to measure exactly how it behaved across different settings. What I found is that almost none of the labels on this unit actually correspond to what the unit claims that it's doing. They're often off by quite a few percent. Especially the high pass filter, the frequencies are almost double of what it says on the face. The 220 Hertz symbol really means it's a 440 Hertz high pass, but I wouldn't have known that unless I ran test tones through it to check all of those different settings. Using the environment of Max for Live, I tried my best to emulate the behavior of every single one of these equalizers and also emulate the saturation characteristics of this unit as best as I could, and the result is that it's a unit that I would say sounds about 90% the same as a Vintech X81. It's not, of course, exactly the same, but it certainly sounds a lot better than the stock saturator and the stock equalizer. It's much more musical because of how non-linear and almost unpredictable it can be. And I have included little tooltips above everything, just to explain what those things do in case you're quite new to processors and hardware in particular. The drive style section was actually a function of the fact that even with all the equalizers turned off on this unit, the unit tends to really struggle to produce frequencies below 10 Hz and adds a lot of extra distortion to those ranges, but that distortion does tend to carry itself across to higher octaves. So it was quite a challenge trying to figure out how exactly to emulate this type of behavior. And I was able to do it through a combination of a few modules within Max for Live. And if you're very curious, you can actually break apart the instrument. We'll blow this up to 200%, unfreeze, and leave presentation mode. So you can break this apart yourself and actually look at all of the things that I did to make the instrument what it is. We'll leave this for now. So you get both of those processors. They've been preset to a very slight amount of tonal change. The drums and percussion are being saturated a little bit, and the high frequencies are being boosted a little bit. The bass is just left stock. It's really there just to add a little bit of flavor to the basses, and all the basses were designed with this processor active. Let's open up the drums and percussion and start with the breaks. We'll get the headphones on and I'll show you some of the sounds that we have created. These breaks were actually recorded on this tape machine, on this exact tape. And as a matter of fact, it's still wound to the exact position it was in where the recordings stop. For any tape nerds, this is the Maxell XL290. Quite a great sounding tape. Now what this meant is plugging all the microphones into a big mixer first and then having the output of that mixer fed into this tape machine. Something told me it was important to have a completely analog recording path and not to have any digital manipulation whatsoever other than to record it into the computer for use later. And I'll show you the result. So all these breaks were played on a really great kit using really great mics, really great preamps, and by a great drummer. So these are all breaks we've heard before on the records, but we haven't heard them recreated quite like this, and recreated in a way that is at least kind of authentic to how they would have been recorded originally. So you'll also notice that there's an orange section and a blue section. These are the same breaks, but the difference is that these breaks I edited to try to preserve their pitch to be a little lower than just completely speeding them up to 172. And when you go to the blue section, you can see what tempo we actually recorded them at. This is part of the magic. We didn't want to record the breaks at 172 because then the drums would be too low pitched to sound like they were a break. I thought it was important to record them close to the original tempo of the song itself and then speed them up after the fact to make it sound like a sample. And we can compare how it sounds just speeding it up versus editing them. Now, in editing them, I did pitch them up, but I pitched them up sort of with an artist's ear, not to make them too high-pitched, but still high-pitched enough to where it sounded fun and vibrant. A theme throughout the Ruff Rugged kit is that most of the instruments and channels in here do have a processing rack that I built by hand to match the element in question. So for here, the breaks needed some processing, and I'll play you how they sounded right out of the mixer and into the tape machine. I'll disable all the processing. We'll turn it back on. Here made a pretty big difference. You'll find that raw drum recordings or raw recordings in general tend to sound quite mid-rangey and rather lifeless. We're going for a very realistic sound, but then once we're using it in a production environment, we want to really make the sound huge, and that's where a lot of that hugeness comes from. It's quite difficult to make it sound finished right out of the microphones. So we'll try some of the controls in here and see what they sound like. I won't narrate too much of this because I want you to be able to hear what's going on. First, we'll start with bass boost. Try snare sustain. The snare had quite a bit of ring on it, so I wanted you to be able to take that away if you didn't like it. Check out the transient balance. Basically acts like a gate. Try the compressor. Makes the top more firm. Or really dry. The bass sensor just changes where the bass boost is happening. The bass decay we can make really wild. If you sort of wanted to turn the bass drum into a bass instrument all on its own. Old school compression. Make it sound more analog. And a mono center. If you're on headphones, you'll be able to hear better what is going on here. Due to the placement of the microphones and the idiosyncrasies of this tape machine, not all of the frequencies tended to end up in the center. So I wanted to give you a control to be able to center up the lowest frequencies to make them sound a little less shifted around. You can use this to taste, it's more up to you. Next big section are the acoustic drum loops. So these are original drum loops that we sort of improvised on the spot. There were many improvisation sessions that we ended up having to make this kit. I basically approached Arlo, a very good improvisational drummer, and he's got a great groove right in his bones. I just gave him some direction to basically say, this is the kind of thing we're going for. It's break beats, but it can also be kind of in weird timings and be original and more loose. So I basically just let him loose and gave him a metronome in his ear, and he just played away. And I was completely blown away at how good these things turned out. So let's try out some of the acoustic drum loops to see how they sound. And there's lots of loops here, around 65 in total, and the individual elements have processors on them. The kick in particular, I found it was really important to have detailed processing for, and I found a way to re-pitch the kick without having to necessarily open up the click and re-pitch it yourself. So if it suits the track better, you can tune the kick up or down along with a bunch of other things. And we'll give it a try so you can see what it sounds like. And we'll try the transient bias. Really spices it up. The thicken control. The equalizer, which I find is easier to hear in solo. So it just spices it up a little bit. We have a low pass filter. A compressor, some input gain, and a punish control, which just makes it more crunchy. Or more dry. The other thing I wanted to do, which ended up being a much bigger endeavor than I realized, was I wanted to make all of the stems accessible. And the reason I did that is because one of my major complaints with sample packs, especially with drum loops, is that sometimes I just want to turn the snare up or the kick down or something like that. But I have to resort to fairly heavy-handed processing to do it, which comes with its own drawbacks. So I figured, wouldn't it be cool if I just gave everyone access to the original recorded stems? So that's what we have here. It was a lot more work to make it this way, especially considering that I now had to quantize 5 channels at once as opposed to 1, which has its own challenges when you're editing, believe me. But I feel like this ended up making the kit a lot more flexible, and I'm a lot more happy with how it turned out as a result. And we can solo some of the elements so you can see what they sound like. So that's the kick, as we've already looked at. The overhead. Room. Snare bottom. Snare top. So you may choose to take these individual layers and layer them into your song. You may not even need all the rest of the stems because you might want more of just the snare in your track or just the kick or some combination in between and use it as a layer rather than as a foreground element. Be creative. That's why I put these stems in here. I wanted to help inspire you to do new things with your music. The next group are acoustic kick loops. This is from the same kit, but we just did the kick drum. And here's a few samples of that. The ones in green were done on a different day with a different kit and different microphones, so I wanted to segment them off, and they also have different options in terms of what stems are available. And like with the other kicks, you have very similar controls available to you. You can retune, change the transient, thicken, equalize, low pass, etc. And they do sound very different depending on which stem you solo, despite it just being a single part of the drum kit. The room. Snare bottom. Because the kick has so much energy, it tends to activate the snare drum, so you may actually want to use these snare loops just on their own as the basis of a track, even though what's triggering them is not a stick hitting the snare, but rather just the sympathetic energy of the kick actually sounding. The other thing is that you can mix together different stems, so you don't even necessarily have to play everything in the right order. If we were to go to the acoustic drum loops and just play random parts of different recordings together, you can make very interesting and often chaotic sounds. So we'll try just playing this, but then a different overhead, and then a different room, a different snare bottom, and a different snare top. And I would encourage you to mix all these stems together like that and try a brand new combination of breaks that wouldn't have been physically possible in real life. I also made a synthetic kit. This is just made with Operator. What I tried to do is give you as many controls as possible because it is synthetically generated, because you might not want that type of sound for your record depending on what you're doing. So we'll just try a two-step pattern for now. So you have usual controls like decay and the pitch. Really low or super high, almost like a tom. You can change various characteristics of the sound, the volume of certain aspects of it, the attack, almost turning it into an 808, push, which is kind of the mid-range emphasis of it, and the room style, which changes the environment that it's in. As well as lots of other kick patterns that you can use. Next is a synthetic snare, or sort of. It's constituted of several different snare drum recordings all mixed together in 4 separate layers, along with synthetic elements if you so choose. Basically, it's 3 layers deep. The overall sound, which has just a couple of controls, and then deeper in would be the deviant snare creator itself. So it consists of fundamental, noise, tone, and transient. So what I think we should do is play a snare loop, and I can just show you through example how these sounds change depending on what ones you choose. So you can change what sample you're using for pretty much every layer. So we can change it to something else. We can change how velocity sensitive it is, make everything the same. We can also change the high or low pass frequency, the pitch, attack, how high the initial volume is, release, and the amount of sustained volume. If we want a more wrung out type of sound. Now, there is also a layer of synthetic snare, and we can try that instead. Now, this won't do anything because this is a synthetic thing. This is only going to affect the sampled layer, but all the rest of the controls work. All together. You can make very abstract sounding snares using this type of technique. Same goes to the noise layer. We have very similar controls here. We can preview those. Lots of different noise samples for you to choose from. And I'll show you what this high/low pass fade is. So over here, you can change whether or not this is a low pass or high pass filter, along with the resonance. Or make it a bandpass filter, or just a straight up low pass filter with no resonance. make, again, very abstract sounds. It's all about flexibility with this. Snares take forever to make, whether or not you're sampling them from other sources, or in this case, making them from preset sort of Rompler style samplers, or sampling them yourself on real snare drums, whatever you're choosing to do. But I wanted to make it at least somewhat more accessible and exciting to make and craft your own snare drum using samples that I've already gone through, processed, and done up to the best of my ability and organized for you. And one thing I should mention about the noise is that you have an offset control, so you can purposefully add more delay to just this sound to make it sound like the room is bigger. You can make quite unusual sounds with this. As well, in the noise layer, we have a synthetic layer if you'd prefer that. This won't do anything. And it can be quite interesting to add or remove these layers too. Turn it into a completely different instrument. We can also check out the tone layer. We have the same controls. We have our transient layer as well, which is just a quick knock sound to increase the snappiness. And the same control scheme applies. There's also a synthetic transient as well. This is a fairly small detail in the snare, but you'll tend to find that you need some sort of transient emphasis to make sure that it sounds as big as possible. So we'll switch back to a sampled one for now. And on top of this, we can use the overall controls to shape the sound further. Make it sound less or more full. Purposefully exaggerate the transient volume. Add or remove punch. A little more or less bottom end. Change the stereo width. And do mid-range compression. These two go hand in hand, so definitely experiment with them. The next module is the kit snare. So this was played acoustically, and this went back to the improvisational play style. So I gave Arlo a drum break, and then he played the snare over top of it, and then we came up with all sorts of different variations on how you could play a snare on a breakbeat. And in total, we came up with around 150 of them. So I feel like there should be some sort of liftoff point in there. Let's play a few. Rim shot, hitting the main part of the snare, you name it. We've played it in all sorts of different ways. And I've color coded them to try to make the play styles clear, as well as a little bit of brush stuff. Some stuff that's more ambient, some stuff that's really hard and heavy. And we can preview what the individual mics sound like too. So it's just overhead, just the room, snare bottom, and snare top. And like the others, we have controls for the overall snares, as well as some of the individual elements too. We'll try some of those. We can change the stereo balance of it. We can boost up the low-level details if we want. Give it tons of sustain. Add some compression. Crush it, make it really, really crunchy. A resonance removal. make it sound super gated. A stick removal tool, which will basically make the sound of the sticks hitting the side of the rim a little less sharp. You can add or remove bottom end. Make it sound really thin or really thick. And like the others, we can play the recordings out of order too. And then make totally new rhythms out of one singular snare recording. So let's keep going. We have the snare shuffles, which go in between snare hits. This was actually something that was added later based on Strange's feedback. He felt like it was important to have snare shuffles since that's something that's a bit underserved in the sample market, and I couldn't agree more. In the end, it really worked out, and thank you again, Arlo. You're an amazing drummer, and I'm so glad you have the patience to play this many abstract beats. Now, to give you better context, what I'm going to do is actually play the synthetic snare on a more standard loop, just to give you a sense of grounding, and then I'm going to play the snare shuffles around it so you can hear what the purpose of these shuffles is. So it's the little details that fill in the drum break to make it sound more full. And you still have some control over these, even though they're not a main feature, simply because it's important to be able to be creative, no matter how small or big the detail is in the song. And we'll try out some of the controls. You can really push it right up on the highs, or totally gate them right down. Same thing with the mids. And a bit of extra push in the low frequencies if you want them, or walk it right back and make it more thin. And of those, there's plenty of snare shuffles as well. I didn't want to underserve it, so we've included 75 of those snare shuffles. Next would be the cymbals. They were done on two completely different sessions with, again, different cymbals, mics, and in a different room. So they needed different processing for each, and I felt that it would make more sense to separate them off into two banks as opposed to mixing them all together. So we'll try out some loops from cymbals A. And a fun fact, this exact loop was actually featured in my track with Strange and Flow Anastasia called Face Yourself, which you can stream on Spotify or most other major streaming platforms. Some more abstract sounding loops that are kind of more mysterious and fun. Arlo has an amazing collection of jazz cymbals in particular that have a great fizzle to them, and I thought it was super important for us to get a good spread of that. So why don't we pick a loop and try some of these controls so you can see what they do. We have a mid reduction control, high reduction. This one's more subtle. Resonance control. This one's a little more clear what it does. A mid exciter, basically boosting up the sound, and a high exciter to make it very trebly if that suits the song more. There's lots to pick from here too. And maybe you just wanted the room mic, because you want a very, very distant sounding mono cymbal. And that's what all the loops we've picked so far sound like in tandem. And we'll come back to that. We'll make a little sketch quickly so you can kind of see what a creative process could look like within Ruff Rugged. And we'll solo the second group of recordings. All sorts of different options here. And this one I went really crazy with. We ended up doing a total of 157 cymbal loops for the second session. We could not do a little bit of jazz. He is a jazz drummer after all. There's a few little Easter eggs here. These are Russian words. Oftentimes, I don't feel like programming in cymbals with MIDI, and I've really liked having these here because they were played by a real player on really great drums and on really great mics, so they have a nice full, complete sound to them already, and they don't sound out of place or really synthetic in and amongst the other elements that I've chosen for my productions. And I hope that these can really expedite your writing process too. We have plenty of hi-hat recordings as well. With all sorts of different play styles. I had him play the bell, the end of it, somewhere in between. I really got him to improvise with it. And these ones I've color coded because they're quite different than each other. And we'll try some of the controls as well. We have a crusher, a lo-fi shaper, tone, a high pass. Make them really, really thin if we need. We can also boost the low-level details. Fast compressor to tame some of those transients. A tail remover. This will be easier to hear on headphones. And then totally dry. This low-level reverb is just basically to get rid of gaps in the sound. Since all of these were quantized by hand, not with hitting Control U and quantize, I mean going in there and moving those waveforms around, it left gaps in the audio occasionally. So what I did is I used a reverb plugin to basically fill in those tiny little gaps, and then you can choose how much of that smoothing you want to apply. It can be more easily heard if we turn the level details up really high. There's plenty here to choose from too. Hi-hats are such an important part of drum and bass. It really sets the attitude of the song, I find, depending on how you use them. I also have some tom loops and fills. We didn't go too crazy with this because realistically, in this genre of music, toms aren't going to be the main focus of the music, but they're a big part of drum kits, so why not capture them? And so the next major section we have is percussion, and there's lots of different kinds of percussion in here. These ones were all actually played by Max. I felt like Arlo had put in his time playing all these drum loops. This sidechain control is specifically to sidechain the percussion against the kick and the snare. At least in my mixes and in my productions, I tend to do this type of thing where I want the percussion to be much quieter whenever the kick and snare are sounding to not make too much mud. So I've made a processor like that for you, and then you can just control how it's affecting the mix, or if you don't want it to do anything at all, then you can just turn the thresholds all the way up and it won't. So we've got bongo, with as many variations as we could possibly come up with. And these are now mixing together the two layers for a bit of extra interest. Kind of makes it sound like it's two bongos, but one's distant and one's close. We can play them in unison again. Bongos are a great detail instrument for productions. Cajon. I really like the sound of cajon. It's got a nice deep character to it. We have castanet. So these will fit between all sorts of different grooves. Definitely try and see what you can come up with. Could not have cowbell. Got one set pan left and right. All the percussion was actually recorded with Gefell UMT-70S microphones. I'm really happy with how those sound on drums. I've never heard something quite as 3D and as smooth as those. We have a guiro, which we both tapped and scraped. And you could probably use this for all sorts of sound design purposes, not even specifically to write a beat with. Some classic shaker sounds. Quad and dual just means that he was either holding 2 shakers in each hand or 1 shaker in each hand. I've also had a hard time finding good shaker samples, so I wanted to rectify this with that. With tambourines that we both hit and shook. Both on triplet and sort of more straight grooves. And there's definitely potential there to turn these into beats just on their own by adding the right supporting elements. We kind of thought not only do we want to make stuff that could be in the background, but also foreground. We have our triangle. The triangle always reminds me of classic breaks from the 90s. I wanted to make sure that we had triangle in here. So by all means, please make me songs that sound like Adam F. Circles. I'm all about it. We have our wood block. Tried a few of these. And of course, drumsticks. These ones are low played. Hopefully you'll find that there's enough variation in there to really craft your own unique type of beat using some of the techniques that I've shown here and some ones that you'll come up with yourself. I'm very excited to hear what you guys make with this. So, just for fun, why don't we go ahead and try and make a quick little beat out of the elements that are in the percussion area. So maybe we'll start with the synthetic kick, just on the regular 2-step pattern. And maybe we'll try the kit snare. And I'll change the quantize so that it's more in beat. It's kind of fun. That might be a good contender to use with the shuffles. Pause these for now. It's kind of cool. Let's add some cymbals. Maybe we'll swap out the snare. Yeah, that's groovy. Maybe we'll add some hi-hats too. I like that. Maybe we'll add a little bit of bongos. And maybe some shakers. So go crazy, be creative, and just have fun. So the next thing we'll look at is the bass. Max played a great block of electric bass loops here, and I'm really excited to show them to you. What I'll do is I'll have the break in the background to show you the kind of funk and groove that they have. So I'll stop all, try break 6, maybe break 2. Yeah, break 1. And we'll turn this down just a little bit so you can hear them better. Let's give it a try. Let's go down a little further. We'll try some B minor. Trust me, when I was in the studio listening to him play this stuff in real time, my jaw was practically on the floor. He's such a good player. Gotta play some harmonics in D major. Try some E. And we'll try soloing them, just so you can get a better sense of how the tone is. Now, due to the nature of how electric bass is recorded, you will notice some high fuzz on these. So if you're finding that there's a bit too much, you can turn down the compressor control. Likewise with the EQ. You can make it sound more flat if you want, and add some fuzz even. But stock, when you buy the kit, it'll come with the compressor and EQ turned all the way up, but you can dial these up to taste. I'm really excited to hear what you guys come up with these bass loops. I'm really happy with how these turned out. Great job, Max. Next, we'll look at the synth basses. These are basses that I made over the course of many weeks of just coming home after work and sitting down and deciding, all right, I'm gonna make a bass patch today. And then over many weeks, I came up with all these. So we'll try a few and see what we can make happen. Maybe we'll try this one on bark bass. We'll try matrix. And we'll try some of these controls here, like outflow shape and so on. And there's all sorts of different patterns I've come up with here as a starting point. We try this A minor bubbler. Or one called heavy hitter. Let's try it on a different patch called Bushman Bite. You can really change how all these bass patches work, and I wanted the flexibility and creativity to be a main focus of these bass patches. I'm just kind of messing around with the controls so you guys can see what they do. try a different pattern over on Rave Stab. And some of them have very unusual controls on them to make them sound kind of atonal. Bunch of reverb. Maybe we'll try the Perez wobble, inspired by Alex Perez, of course. We have our obscure control. I wanted to give some of the controls fun names instead of just high, low cut, that type of thing, because I wanted them to express what they did on an emotional level as well. Adjust the noise center. Make it really wobbly, or not very wobbly at all. Just make it a pure sine wave even. Let's try another one. Try Beefeater. Over on BSE Stab. We'll just mess around with the controls like Grit. The noise pinch. Add a little clipping with the punish control. And of course, I had to have a Reese in here. And this is a sampled Reese. And this is actually the same Reese that I use also in Face Yourself. I was just so happy with the sound I couldn't not use it. Add a little 3D. More noise. Add a little phase type of filtering in there. Very fun. And there's all sorts of bass patches in here for you to enjoy and explore. All of them have most, if not all, of their macros mapped, because I wanted to have maximum control and make these patches as fun as possible to use. So try out the synths, and for these, I might actually borrow some MIDI from later on. Yeah, we'll try Posy from the piano area, which I'll cover soon, on the thick saw. And there are some MIDI pieces over here, but one of my favorite things to do is to use the piano MIDI, which was played beautifully by Flo Anastasia, on the synths to try to dial in my sound. Let's try. And I'll mess around with some of the controls again, just so you can see what they do. A width, amount of detune. We'll try our butter saw. Maybe we'll try another MIDI loop as well. Let's try Delightful Afternoon. That sounds good. We'll try it on kalimba. We'll mess around with some of the controls, like the cutoff, how fast the delay is. And because of the way that delays work, if you speed and slow them up, they're going to increase in pitch. And the names are really just based on how the patch made me feel. Try the Memory Man. This is based on the name of a guitar pedal. Try adjusting the cutoff and feedback and stuff. I'm gonna try B minor grommet on boards of YYZ. I'll let you guess what that was based on. Try adjusting the tone. Why don't we try another one? Try Purple Blossom on chorus organ. And we have lots of controls here too, like chorus speed. A little drive. You can brighten the patch up. Kind of give it a sort of chorus feel with the notch as well. Add tons of reverb. You can boost the mids up. Or just turn it into individual little bops. It's a pretty flexible patch. I kind of wanted it to sound kind of like the organ sound on a Nord. So let's check out the pianos. It started with these. We have the acoustic piano recordings. So Max is quite a good keyboard player, even though he's a guitar player by trade. He trained himself on how to play piano. It's quite impressive. We started out recording these because he had recently gotten this piano, and we were really excited to try out not only what microphones might sound best on it, but the piano itself. It's just a gorgeous instrument. And so in doing, we came up with all sorts of ideas, and then we thought to ourselves, well, if we're already recording this piano, why don't we sample it? So piano sampling is something I'd never done, but I had theorized about. And the approach that we took is that he played every note on the piano 4 times over at different volume levels. I then went in very meticulously, separated out all of those recordings, put them into a sampler, layered 4 samplers on top of each other, and then mapped their velocity to each sampler so that depending on how hard you played the keyboard, the notes would play out of the respective samplers for the different velocities. And I'll show you what I mean. There is a forte, mezzo piano, piano, and resonance layer. The resonance is just the string resonance between each other. It does nothing technically musical. Essentially, these are the 4 banks of recordings that exist, and you can only get access to them by playing at a certain velocity. And to blend between those 2 layers, I had a filter very exactly meet at the frequency response of one recording to the next, so that it was harder to hear the difference between the layers jumping back and forth. The result, I feel like, is actually quite convincing. It sounds very close to the original acoustic piano recordings that we did, and in some respects exceeds them, because it's in MIDI, you can just change it to whatever you want. And I'm happy to say, if you're a piano player, this is piano player approved. I've had a number of good keyboardists play the DEV Key C189, and they've all said that the velocity, the feel, and the tone of the piano is exactly what they would have hoped for. So I was very happy to hear that from some good piano players, and I hope that you guys feel the same too. So I'll play you each. So where we started from was playing these ourselves, and I'm quite happy with them. They're very inspiring loops. And some of them have creative edits in them, like reverses, little reverb bits baked in, that kind of thing. I wanted them to be as inspiring as possible. And some of them have variations as well. And as you'd expect, it has tone controls as well. Try A minor rise to power. Maybe we'll try Old Chest. What was in my mind was a lot of really inspirational liquid tunes, and I wanted it to be easy to come up with some sort of liftoff point to make fun and exciting liquid tunes. Because I'm certainly not the best keyboardist in the world, so for me, having these preset piano liftoff points was incredibly useful. So it was basically trying to address a problem that I had that hopefully someone else out there had too. Got a little creative, did some bass walks. And not everything necessarily is in the key. I wanted to have things be a little more atonal at times if you wanted something more mysterious. And we can go down a little further. Maybe we'll try E flat, ledger. Maybe we'll try out some of these controls as well. So this is basically no corrective EQ, all the way up to full corrective. We also have a multi-band compressor, which is just for mild control over the highs, mids, and lows. You can make it more aggressive or less aggressive. You can also high pass the piano if it sounds better when it's more thin. I also have multi-effects in here. You can make it really heavy-handed or really light. You can also mix lots of delay in or tons of reverb. So you can kind of make it sound more ethereal or make it darker if you want. And there's plenty of piano recordings in here, both tonal and atonal, totaling 130. And then in the DEV keys, which, as I was saying before, is the sampled one, I had Flo Anastasia play some excellent little ditties here. And I'm quite happy with what she played. She's a very good player. I can't tell you how many hours I spent mapping the velocity for each layer, trying to get it to sound exactly right. It was a very big undertaking to get piano samples to cooperate with each other, especially considering the variability of the instrument and trying to make it still playable and not overly processed sounding. And I'm very happy for the experience. I've learned so much throughout doing this whole project, especially on the piano sampling end of things. This was something that I was probably working on for about 4 months on and off, just coming back to it, refining the layers, refining the way that the recording sounded, taking out little noises and isotope, that kind of thing, to where we arrived at now. So it definitely gave me a lot of respect for amazing sounding digital pianos as well, because the work that goes into that is just incredible. Play a few more layers. And we can also adjust some of the controls here too, see what it sounds like with no EQ. And this is more what it sounded like when we recorded it. You can add some compression if you want. We'll try a different loop. And then with no compression. You can also play it completely dry with no verb. These controls affect how the piano plays. The damping speed is how quickly the notes fall off when you let them go. So it makes them rather unrealistic if you turn them all the way down, but if you turn them all the way up, it emulates how a real piano would react. And the hammer speed is just how much attack the piano has. And the open resonance controls how much of this you add. We can solo it. It'll be very subtle, you have to listen carefully. But a piano has these open resonances that come up when you play the keys, and so you can add more of that like on a real piano or less of it. And then the cabinet just affects the shape of the sound. So you can have none. It's just totally dry. Or give it a little more room tone. Run here sounds pretty natural. Because the piano has a natural fall off time as well, but because these are samples, you have to basically emulate what would happen in a cabinet as the sound gradually dies down. And then lastly, but certainly not leastly, we have guitars. Max is, as we were saying before, a trained guitar player, an amazing guitar player, has been playing most of his life. So I was very excited to get him to play some guitar loops, and I'm extremely pleased with how they turned out. Let's try some of them out. Maybe we'll mix down the delay a little bit. Try A minor Superfly. Try Collateral. And some of them we have more effects on, some of them more traditional, some of them are funk, some of them are jazz. There's a big spread of different types of guitar styles in here. We'll try Straw House. You can, of course, turn down the delay and turn down the reverb and that kind of thing if you prefer to hear them how we recorded them. Now, there is spring reverb baked into it because his Victoriad amp has beautiful spring reverb. We could not have a little bit of that in there. But I find the reverb just helps place it in the room a little bit. It sounds more stereo. Some of the names try to describe to you what kind of vibe they feel. And you have other tone controls as well. You can darken the recordings. Move the low frequencies as well if you want. Or have them more full sounding. And a compressor. Really squash it. Or just leave it totally stock. We'll try a few more. That one we hooked up some delay pedals for and really went to town. And some more kind of jazzy, low to the earth type of stuff. Let's try Comfy Vest. And of course we have a few that are keyless, that are just meant to be more kind of an effect. Try Helium. Try Swirling. This one's best with delay. And we couldn't not do acoustic guitar. His acoustic guitar sounds amazing, and we got lots of fun, funky grooves in here as well. This one kind of reminds me of listening to the History Channel. And like the others, we have some tone controls here. So you can really affect the shape of it if you want. Get rid of the compression if you don't want that. Just kind of leave the natural tone of it. We can also get rid of the delay if we don't want that either. So this is basically just as they were recorded with a little bit of EQ now. Try Gooseneck. I don't feel like I hear acoustic guitar very often in drum and bass, and it was kind of unfortunate, so I wanted to see if I could fix that. I'll give you some creative jump-off points with that, see where you go. Try a few more. plenty of acoustic guitar loops to choose from as well. And finally we have effects, and we'll try some of them out. All of them are fully configurable. You can change all sorts of parameters about them. Some classic sounds that I always find hard to find in sample packs, so I wanted to just make the instrument themselves because it seemed doable. So we'll try the jungle siren. It's a classic sound. You can also speed it up and slow it down. Or make the siren depth a little less so it kind of sounds more like a phone. We have a second variation on that siren. And we can try increasing the release time, make it longer. And we can change the tone of the siren a lot too. You can make it really fast. We have a whoop sound. And you'll notice that the wheels are moving on their own sometimes. It's because these clips occasionally have automation baked into them. I wanted to make it a little more fast and accessible to use these instruments, so I gave you some clips that already move the knobs for you. But by all means, make your own variations on these. These were just really to demonstrate what the instrument could do if you set them up with some automation. A hall kick, because we all need that kind of sound every once in a while. We can change lots of parameters about it, the attack and so on. How much push it has. The style of the room it's in. You can make it really low or really high. Change the knock. How much high frequencies get kept during the reverb. So you can really customize that hall kick, so no two hall kicks would sound the same. And so basically on a high level, that's Ruff and Rugged. There's also lots of demos in here for you to check out, so you can see different ways in which this kit can be used. I encourage you to take a listen through all of them. I've had some help along the way making these. And then there's also some test MIDI over here as well. I used this to actually create the piano and check for inconsistencies between the velocity layers. If you end up making your own sampled instrument, I would encourage you to use these. It took me a while to create these test sequences, so I figured I would include them since they might be useful to you in the future. And overall, I'm just really pleased to call this project done. It was about a year in the making, and I have learned so much as an artist. I have made great new friends, and it has introduced me to great new opportunities. And most of all, I'm just glad that I could have created something that can help inspire the creativity of other people as well. So whatever you create with Ruff and Rugged, please let me know. Tag me, whatever, email me, show me some stuff that you've come up with. It's always so fun to see what other people do with your work and how they reinterpret the content that you create. So I really appreciate you all watching and checking out this sort of top-level overview of Ruff and Rugged. If you have any questions, let me know. Get out there, create, explore, have fun, enjoy the kit, and thank you so much for watching.